Here's everything you might have missed in Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home is finally here, and folks, it lives up to the hype and then some. The capstone of this initial Tom Holland starring Spider-Man trilogy is a loving homage to 20 years of Spider-Man storytelling and has implications for not just Peter Parker in the present, but the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it. We've been breaking down everything from the film's ending and post-credit scenes to what Spider-Man No Way Home means for movies like Black Panther: Wakanda Forever and shows like Ironheart over on Nerdist.com. But today we're turning our eye of Agamotto to the Easter eggs, comic book references, and hidden details that abound in Spider-Man No Way Home. And while we'll likely have to wait until No Way Home is available to watch at home to catch each and every Easter egg that we might have missed, we've assembled a comprehensive breakdown of the biggest ones that you might have missed while watching this delightfully frenetic film. We're gonna break it all down in just a moment, but obviously to do so we need to spoil what happens in Spider-Man No Way Home. So if you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home and don't want us to spoil Spider-Man No Way Home for you, leave now before we spoil Spider-Man No Way Home for you. Spoilers. Alright, let's get into it, shall we? So the film begins in the immediate aftermath of Spider-Man Far From Home, and while Peter and MJ are swinging to safety, we see several ads for Rogers the Musical. First appearing in Hawkeye, Rogers the Musical takes us through the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan's life all the way through the Battle of New York that unfolded in Avengers. And speaking of Hawkeye, as we see by No Way Home's end, it's Christmas time in New York, and Peter swings past the giant Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center. As we've seen teased by the Hawkeye trailers and in Episode 5, we know that Clint Barton and Kate Bishop's Disney Plus series is going to feature a major showdown at 30 Rock on Christmas Eve. Now, spoilers for Hawkeye, that show just reintroduced Kingpin into the Marvel Cinematic Universe as played by Vincent D'Onofrio, and Spider-Man No Way Home brought back Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, both from Netflix's Daredevil series. Matt is serving as Peter Parker's legal counsel to help him beat the Mysterio murder charges. And there's another fun connection in this scene. Jon Favreau, who plays Happy Hogan, also played Matt Murdock's law partner, Foggy Nelson, in 2003's Daredevil starring Ben Affleck. As for the file photo they used for Happy Hogan on the news, that is a callback to Happy's Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction inspired look from the 1999 flashback scenes in Iron Man 3, which is a better movie than you think. It's good. Now, speaking of legal counsel, while MJ's being interrogated by the Department of Damage Control agents, we learn her full name is actually Michelle Jones Watson. While she goes by Michelle Jones, that officially means there is an MJ Watson in the MCU. Now, maybe this MJ also has a complicated relationship with her dad, kind of like we see happen in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. As for Damage Control, we saw them previously in Spider-Man Homecoming when they took over salvage operations following the Battle of New York, which ultimately sent Adrian Toomes down the villainous path to becoming the Vulture. Created by Dwayne McDuffie and Ernie Colon, Damage Control dates all the way back to 1989's Marvel Comics Presents number 19, and the apparent leader of Damage Control here is Agent Cleary, better known as Albert Cleary in the comics, who first appeared way back in Damage Control number 1. Apparently his security clearance is awfully high because he knows that Nick Fury's been off-world for quite some time, which is news to Peter, who had no idea the Nick Fury he'd been working with was actually the Skrull Talos during the events of Far From Home. Now, at Happy Hogan's Long Island apartment where Peter and May go to lie low, we see a familiar-looking robot, and that is Dummy. First appearing in Iron Man, Dummy is a hydraulic arm robot that Tony built as a teenager, and more recently we saw Dummy helping to pack up Stark Tower in Spider-Man Homecoming, and now it apparently lives as Happy's roommate.
Yeah, no, put that down. That's worth more than you or me.
Dummy is also involved in another callback to Spider-Man Homecoming later in the film when it knocks over a Lego Death Star, similar to what happens when Ned learns Peter's secret identity in that film. During Peter's first day back at school, Betty Brant, now an intern for the Daily Bugle, offers some familiar words to Peter during her news report. Go get him, Tiger. Now, as many Spider-Man fans know, Tiger was Mary Jane's nickname for Peter in the comics, and Mary Jane says the line verbatim at the end of Spider-Man 2.
Go get him, Tiger.
Also during the scene, we hear a familiar voice urging Spider-Man to do a flip. In Spider-Man Homecoming, comedian Zach Cherry played a man named Clev, who asked just for that.
Do a flip!
Later in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Clev live-streamed the fight between Shang-Chi, Razorfist, and the Ten Rings goons on a San Francisco City bus, but now he's back to doing what he loves the most, and that is yelling at Spider-Man to do sweet-ass flips.
Yeah!
Maybe my favorite detail of Peter's first day back at school, though, is when we learn that Flash Thompson wrote a book about his friendship with Spider-Man called Flashpoint. This is a clever nod to one of DC Comics' most famous alternate reality stories, Flashpoint, in which Barry Allen tries to alter the course of history, and it has catastrophic effects on reality as we know it. That story is going to be the focal point of the upcoming Flash movie. Well, the comic book story, not Flash Thompson's memoir, unless Amalgam Comics is coming back, which... No, it's not. Moving on, when we see Peter and MJ trying to catch their breath on the school roof, there is graffiti reading Ditko and G. Kane. Ditko refers to legendary Spider-Man and Doctor Strange co-creator Steve Ditko. And G. Kane, that is iconic comics writer and penciler Gil Kane, who in addition to creating Green Lantern for DC, was part of the creative team behind the night Gwen Stacy died during his time on Amazing Spider-Man, a heartbreaking moment that is revisited in No Way Home. Peter, Ned, and MJ are all rejected from MIT, which was their top school. Now, if you recall, MIT has an important place in the MCU. Tony Stark and James Rhodes are both alumni. Tony gave his infamous barf demonstration there during Civil War. A device we learned during Far From Home was designed by Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. And more recently, we saw Killmonger studying there in What If. As for how MIT could play a major role in movies like Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and shows like Ironheart, though, make sure you check out Rosie Knight's article over on Nerdist.com. At the Sanctum Sanctorum, we get the answer to several lingering questions. It's snowy inside because a gateway to Siberia was left open. Comertage acolytes are busy shoveling snow, including one that might be Zelma Stanton, Doctor Strange's librarian from the comics, who first appeared in 2015's Doctor Strange #1. Most importantly, we learn that Wong is now the Sorcerer Supreme rather than Doctor Strange, thanks to Steven getting dusted during Avengers Infinity War. Wong says he's busy attending to higher duties, which could reference getting to the bottom of that mysterious beacon inside of the 10 rings that they discovered during the mid-credit scene of Shang-Chi. Or maybe he just has another fight with Abomination to make some extra scratch because, let's face it, the Sanctum's not going to repair itself.
Seriously? You don't have any money?
Attachment to the material is detachment from the spiritual.
Doctor Strange's spell to make people forget Peter Parker is called the Runes of Koth-Kal, and while I haven't found a specific comic book counterpart for this, it does rely heavily on the use of magical runes, which we see towards the end of the film as well. Now, these runes, especially the ones at the end, are reminiscent of the ones that we saw in WandaVision's finale, which could be one of the many reasons that Doctor Strange will seek out Wanda's help in the forthcoming Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is teased in the post-credit scene. Doctor Strange mentions a full moon party at Comertage, which the Runes of Koth-Kal spell made everyone forget, and while this is meant as a throwaway joke, it could also be a super deep-cut reference to the 1992 film Dr. Mordred. Distributed by Full Moon Entertainment, this movie began its life as a Doctor Strange movie, but they lost the rights to Doctor Strange before production could actually start. So in a way, this could be that forgotten full moon that Doctor Strange is talking about. Now, as for the Runes of Koth-Kal spell itself, this ties back into multiple comic storylines that we've detailed in previous videos. One More Day, One Moment in Time, and Happy Birthday. Basically, in One More Day, Peter's identity is publicly revealed, which leads to Aunt May being wounded by a gunshot. To save her life, Peter turns to the demon Mephisto, who agrees to erase the world's memory that he's Spider-Man and save Aunt May in exchange for taking away his marriage to Mary Jane. Now, ultimately, Peter and MJ agree to this, and it hits the reset button on Peter's life, much like we see by the film's end. 2010's One Moment in Time expanded on the aftermath of that story. Despite their Faustian bargain with Mephisto, Peter finds himself in another impossible situation. This time, Mary Jane gets wounded because of her connection to Spider-Man, so Peter takes her to Doctor Strange for healing. Peter also has Strange cast a spell to make the world forget that he's really Spider-Man, and much like we see in No Way Home, he alters the parameters at the very last second. As for the multiverse of it all, that seems to be covered by 2003's Happy Birthday, a story that saw Doctor Strange and Spidey teaming up to stop Dormammu from destroying the world. Now, Strange sent Spider-Man through time and space to stop Mr. Fantastic from accidentally opening a portal that lets Dormammu through to our plane of existence. And in doing so, Peter relives many of his iconic moments as Spider-Man over the years and encounters many classic villains along the way, just like we see in No Way Home. Now, speaking of those villains, Peter's trip to the George Washington Bridge reintroduces us to some familiar faces, like Alfred Molina as Dr. Otto Octavius, and Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin from the Sam Raimi films. And the suit that Peter's wearing to impress MIT's Assistant Vice Chancellor is a visual nod to the one that Tobey Maguire wore during Peter's date with Mary Jane in Spider-Man 3. And while Peter pleads his case to the Assistant Vice Chancellor, the license plate on that car reads 63ASM3. That stands for Amazing Spider-Man #3, which was published in 1963. Written by Stan Lee and co-written and illustrated by Steve Ditko, it features the very first appearance of Dr. Octopus, so fitting license plate. And speaking of Stan Lee, the taxicab behind the Assistant Vice Chancellor's car is number 1228, which is a subtle nod to Lee's birthday, December 28th. But wait, there's Excelsior more! When Otto yeets an Otto at Peter in his Iron Spider suit, we see another license plate reading ASM 8183. Now this could reference a couple different things. Obviously ASM means Amazing Spider-Man, but 8183 could be a date, August 1st, 1983. On that day, Marvel published Amazing Spider-Man 243, a story called Options, in which Peter mulls some major decisions about his future, including whether or not to give up being Spider-Man once and for all. It may also refer to a run of 3 Spider-Man comics, Amazing Spider-Man 81 through 83, which involved a series of incidents involving Peter's activities as Spider-Man putting Aunt May and Gwen in harm's way, the return of Electro, Peter's Spider-Man suit getting tarnished, and Peter debating whether or not to tell Gwen Stacy his real identity. But like Reed Richards on the torture rack in the Sanctum Sanctorum's Undercroft, it's a bit of a stretch. But the themes do tie back to the central idea of Peter's secret identity being crucial to keeping his loved ones safe. Now back at the Sanctum, Ned mentions that magic runs in his family, which foreshadows him using the sling ring later on. But it turns out there's a deeper comic book connection as well. As you may know, in the comics, Ned Leeds is the alter ego of the villainous Hobgoblin. While the Ned of the MCU shares more in common with Miles Morales' man-in-the-chair Ganke Lee, Ned Leeds did dabble in the occult at least once in the comics. During the Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality miniseries, Ned stole a book of magic from Doctor Strange, which Baron Mordo used to alter reality. In this brave new world, Mordo was Sorcerer Supreme and Ned was his magical assistant. Now, considering how impressed Strange seems with Ned towards the end of the film, perhaps we'll see another story down the line involving Ned becoming a sorcerer himself. Later, when we catch up with Norman Osborn in an alleyway, he's arguing with his Green Goblin helmet like he did in the original Spider-Man. When he smashes the helmet and walks away, though, it's intentionally framed to evoke John Romita Sr.'s iconic artwork from Amazing Spider-Man number 50, Spider-Man No More. Sam Raimi also brought this art to life when Peter gave up being Spider-Man for a time in Spider-Man 2, so it's a nice way to revisit that moment here. Norman seeks out aid at the Feast Center where Aunt May works. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man 548, this charity intended to help New York's homeless and hungry played a major role in both the comics and Insomniac's Spider-Man video game. Of course, Feast's founder, Martin Lee, turned out to secretly be the criminal Mr. Negative and was using the charity as a front for his gang, the Inner Demons. And while we don't see that happen in this film, it could unfold in future Spider-Man films. And speaking of the Insomniac game, later in the movie, we see Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man launching himself using webs as a slingshot just like he does in the games, which is an awesome addition. Moving on, to contain the spell gone awry, Doctor Strange compressed the raw magical energy into a crystalline object, similar to what we saw happen in What If. And Strange contained this botched spell inside a powerful relic known as the Machina de Cadavis, which references the Crystal of Cadavis, an enchanted skull-shaped crystal that first appeared in Marvel Team-Up number 21. However, Peter's conversation with Aunt May gives him a change of heart. He doesn't want to send these villains back to their respective universes where they are apparently doomed to die. This mission to make sure that no one dies could be an homage to Amazing Spider-Man 655, where Peter promises to himself that whenever Spider-Man is around, no one dies. Of course, it's easier said than done, as both comics Peter and movie Peters learn the hard way. It's also fitting that Peter tries to steal the Machina de Cadavis because the villain Xandu once mind-controlled Spider-Man in the comics to try and steal the relic from Doctor Strange, so hey, it's happening all over again. That box you like is back in style. Here, though, it leads to Peter having a very different out-of-body experience, much like the Ancient One gave to Stephen Strange in the original Doctor Strange movie. Later, when Peter decides to try and help save each of these multiversal villains, Norman Osborn says his iconic line from the original Spider-Man.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
God, Willem Dafoe just kicks so much ass in this movie. That's all, he's just great. At Happy's apartment, Peter uses a Stark Industries fabricator to manufacture the necessary tools he needs to fix Doc Ock's malfunctioning inhibitor chip. Now, you may recall the fabricator from Spider-Man Far From Home, which Peter uses to craft a new suit. This device is powered by an arc reactor, specifically what appears to be the new element reactor with a triangular shape in the center that appeared in Iron Man 2. In Happy's kitchen, Aunt May has a flirtatious moment with Dr. Octopus, which feels like a reference to Amazing Spider-Man 131, where Aunt May and Doc Ock nearly tied the knot. Or maybe it's just like Marissa Tomei told Nerdist's own Hector Navarro in our No Way Home interviews.
I think May has a nice sexual appetite, and I don't think anything is off of the menu. And doesn't she also have something with Ant-Man at one point, right? So there's at least 2 that we know, I think.
Unfortunately, things take a turn for the deadly when Norman Osborn gives into his inner goblin and starts attacking Peter. In the lobby, Norman, wearing his purple hood to evoke his comic book look, attacks and fatally wounds Aunt May in a parallel to one of the biggest inciting events in the One More Day storyline. Now, like we told you before, Green Goblin much better at taking out ants than he is spiders. I said Before she goes off to see that big Uncle Ben in the sky, Aunt May tells Peter the line that every Spider-Man fan has been waiting to hear. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. And no, they didn't just change this line to be different. That's how the iconic phrase originally appeared in Spider-Man's first appearance in 1962's Amazing Fantasy number 15. Just as we'll see for Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Mans, this maxim, usually coming from an injured loved one on death's door, is a defining ethos for Spider-Mans across the multiverse. It has a powerful impact on Tom Holland's Peter that's felt by the film's end in particular. Now, speaking of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, the actual worst-kept secret about this movie, when Ned summons them using his sling ring, you can hear snippets of their respective movie themes playing in the background, which is just a nice little detail. We also get a fun riff on the Spider-Man pointing meme from the 1960s animated series when they're in the lab trying to figure out how to fix these invading villains. It's not as explicit as the Into the Spider-Verse homage, but Ned calls out to Peter, and all three point at one another in confusion as they try to figure out who he's talking to. During the showdown at the Statue of Liberty, we see the upgrades that were alluded to in episode 5 of Hawkeye. It's getting a giant Captain America shield for some reason. Sure, let's do it.
Well, it's my first time in New York.
As our Spider-Mans try to build each other up before the battle, we see Tobey Maguire's Peter experiencing back pain until Andrew Garfield becomes your friendly neighborhood chiropractor. Now this is a callback to an infamous scene from Spider-Man 2.
My back! Oh, my back!
That scene in Spider-Man 2 was a nod to Tobey Maguire's real-life back pain resulting from an injury he suffered while making Seabiscuit. And honestly, I gotta say, if any Spider-Man's gonna know a thing or two about back pain, it's definitely gonna be Andrew Garfield's Spidey. During the showdown with the Sinister Several, we see Electro use that stolen arc reactor to power up. And briefly, we see his electricity form a star shape around his face, echoing his classic mask from the comics. And speaking of Electro, earlier in the film, Max Dillon is surprised to learn that Spider-Man is actually white, and says there must be a black Spider-Man out there somewhere. This is a fun allusion to Miles Morales, who we know exists in the MCU thanks to Spider-Man Homecoming. In Homecoming, Donald Glover plays Aaron Davis, better known as the Prowler, a weapons dealer that helps Spider-Man. He wants those Chitauri weapons off the streets because he has a nephew that lives in the neighborhood. That nephew, Miles, is not mentioned by name in the movie, but is in a deleted scene.
Yeah, sorry, Miles, I'm not gonna make it.
As for when we'll actually see Miles in the MCU, we've got some ideas and a deep dive waiting for you over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. But back to that climactic fight. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man finally gets the redemption he's been seeking when he manages to save a falling MJ from what happened to Gwen Stacy during Amazing Spider-Man 2. The entire sequence is framed as a visual parallel to that fateful scene. And as this Peter told the others, after Gwen's death, he went down a very dark path, and this feels like the emotional closure the character needed, as well as for fans who wanted and never got an Amazing Spider-Man 3. In the aftermath of the battle, Doctor Strange struggles to contain the raw magical energy unleashed by Green Goblin's pumpkin bomb exploding the Machina Decadavis. We see tears of purple cosmic energy that almost resemble Kirby Crackle and how they're brought to life on the big screen. As Doctor Strange uses more magical runes to contain these multiversal fractures, we can see other figures looming large in the sky. These are other people that know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and I have to wait to go through this film frame by frame to pick out all of them, but you can definitely see outlines of Kraven the Hunter, Scorpion, and Rhino, just to name a few. While we met a version of Scorpion in the post-credit scene of Spider-Man Homecoming and saw a very different version of Rhino in Amazing Spider-Man 2, Kraven is yet to appear in a Spider-Man film. He was actually intended to be the original villain of No Way Home, but now Kraven's getting his own solo movie starring Aaron Taylor Johnson now that Quicksilver's shuffled off this mortal coil.
You didn't see that coming.
Now, if you want to dive deeper into the ending and mid-credit scene, we have both videos and articles just waiting for you over on Nerdist, but a few things we do want to point out about the ending of this film. After Peter sacrifices the happiness he felt with Ned and MJ to save the world and prevent further multiversal incursions, we see him move into a crappy apartment all on his own for the very first time. And given that Peter's been expunged from the world's collective memory, we see that he's studying for the GED. Once he gets his degree, he could always apply to MIT like Ned and MJ, but fingers crossed the next movies will follow him at Empire State University like we see in the comics. In Peter's new apartment, we see a coffee cup from the diner where MJ works and a Palpatine minifigure from the Lego Death Star set that he and Ned worked on so many moons ago. While neither Ned nor MJ remember who Peter is, he does have a piece of them with him always. As the film comes to a close, we see Spider-Man putting on a brand new brightly colored cloth spider suit that pays homage to his classic comic book look. Because despite being on his own, all the tragedy, all the loss, Peter is never going to stop being New York's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Anyway, folks, there you have it. That is everything we spotted in Spider-Man No Way Home. We're going to be talking about this movie for a long time to come, and there's still so much more to dissect. In the meantime, though, we've got plenty of other deep dives just waiting for you over on Nerdist.com. But for now, tell us, what did you think of No Way Home? Did you spot anything that we missed? And what do you think the future's going to hold for Peter Parker?
I'm sorry, you're saying there's a multiverse?
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.